Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for National Ovarian Cancer Coalition's Ask the Expert series. We are joined today by Dr. Tchabo, and in today's program, we are talking about clinical trials once again. In our first program back in May, we talked about what is a clinical trial and how do I find a clinical trial. And today we are going to focus on, once you have enrolled into a trial, what to expect. And so that is what Dr. Tchabo today joined with us today. We're so excited to have you. It's going to focus on, going to talk a little bit about the process, how things work, risks, benefits, some maybe patient protections as we go along, and then maybe some questions that you might want to ask if you are enrolled into a trial. So welcome, Dr. Tchabo. Thank you for being
with us.
Hey, awesome. Well, let's just get right into it, shall we?
Sounds good.
Okay. So again, we are speaking to those who may have recently been approved or enrolled into a trial and are just starting into that process. So what would you say that they should expect in terms of maybe the process, or what are some of the first things that you would tell a patient when they are enrolled into a trial, what to expect?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me, Ms. McClendon and the National Ovarian Cancer Coalition. It's important to know that clinical trials are part of clinical research and really at the heart of all medical advances. And clinical trials are looking at new ways to prevent, detect, or treat disease. Sometimes that can be new drugs or new combinations of medications, sometimes new surgical procedures or devices, or new ways to use existing treatment. So when a patient's enrolled in a clinical trial, it's important for her to know what phase of the trial she's in. I think that plays a big role in knowing where she is in that process. I mean, each stage of a clinical trial has its own purpose, but it's always important to ensure that the treatment is safe and effective for use for the public. If she's enrolled in a phase 1 trial, that focuses really on the safety and the proper dose. And that's usually on average about less than 60 patients that are enrolled. A phase 2 trial really focuses on effectiveness and side effects. And that's really less than 180 people that had that condition that the study is targeting. The phase 3 trial, which may be what most of patients are enrolled in these clinical trials, is really comparing the new treatment to an existing treatment before the investigators can apply for FDA approval. And that usually involves hundreds of patients. And to go from phase 1 to phase 3 can sometimes take about 10 to 15 years on average for a drug to be approved. So that's important to know. Not that necessarily a patient will be on the trial for 15 years, but important to know that the process to get a drug on the market to be available to treat conditions does take quite a long time because safety is key. And then the fourth phase would be looking at thousands of patients to look at once the drug is approved and available to really look at long-term side effects. So it's important to know what stage of the trial you're involved in. But it's important to know for the clinical trials that there's always a comprehensive plan and a protocol and a treatment staff. You have a principal investigator, he or she is running the trial. You have a staff, a research staff, the pharmacists that are involved, the clinical research nurses that are involved, social workers can be involved in the trial. So there's a whole team of support to definitely receive when you're enrolled in a clinical trial. So it's important to know when you're on the trial, like the outline is the protocol to know the types of patients who can be treated. You learn about your scheduling tests and your procedures, the drugs that you may be exposed to, the dosages of those drugs, and the necessary follow-up and length to the study. So it's important to know when you're on a study that there's always endpoints or results that are going to be measured. And that type of information is important to collect. And sometimes you collect that through Zoom calls, sometimes you collect that through medical diaries, sometimes you collect that through quality of life assessments to see how you're responding to the medication, how you're feeling on the medication. So there's a lot of intense follow-up that's required on a trial. But again, that's again to determine the safety and the effectiveness of the medication being tested so that hopefully it can be available to the public if it is effective.
Oh, that's such a great way to explain all of that because there is a lot involved. So thank you for talking about that. Yeah, and it's like you said, it is important to know what phase of a trial you are in. That's something I don't think I thought about because that duration may be different. The time might be different. The expectations are different. So that's really great to start there, right? Yeah. So that's awesome. So what about in terms of a patient's options? I know I've heard that, sometimes trials may even get delayed or they may even stop for whatever reason. And I also read, and you may go into this too, that you as a patient always have that option to change your mind if it doesn't seem
Of
to
course.
be.
Of
So
course.
could you talk a little bit about maybe some of those delayed stops or why those would happen or take place?
Sure. So you'll have what are called eligibility criteria. So that means who's eligible to participate in the trial, and you'll have exclusion criteria of why a patient may not be chosen for a trial because it may not be the best fit for her. So that's kind of key, and why things can get delayed is sometimes obviously with shortages of medication. That can be a reason a trial is delayed. If you're not meeting the criteria by your counts or by concerns that they're looking to target on CAT scan, that may be a reason why the trial is delayed. So there can be a variety of reasons, and there's also, what we'll talk about probably later when we talk about the safeguards, there's a lot of like review that goes into the protocols to make sure that things are safe and effective for patients. So if that's getting hung up in the IRB, or what's called the Institutional Review Board, that may be a reason why a trial, can't come yet to fruition, or issues with the sponsor, or it could be an issue why the trial may not come to fruition as of yet. Typically, once you're on a trial, why it may be delayed or why you may not continue is if it's not deemed to be safe for you, like if the side effects are greater than the benefits, or if you're not responding to the medication, then it wouldn't make sense to continue on something that's not giving you benefit. So that's sometimes why the trial may have to be stopped in that individual or that participant's case.
So that's something that they clearly are on top of and monitor you. And that's a benefit, right? You're being
right, of
very
course,
carefully. Okay.
And then it's always there's a big stress now on obviously informed consent for patients, that things are clear, that they're understandable, that the patients had a chance to have all her questions answered before participating in the trial. And it clearly states throughout the consent that at any time, if she doesn't feel comfortable pursuing additional treatment on the trial, she can withdraw at any time without any penalty to herself, and would still be eligible, to receive additional treatment for her condition.
Yep. So she could continue on to receive the standard of care. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Well, I think that's good to know, because I don't think a lot of people realize that, and that is an option. So yeah, thanks for covering that. Well, that's great. So we've talked a little bit about the duration, some of the possibilities and expectations of why things may be delayed, the stops that can happen, being able to change your mind. Along the lines of expectation, what are maybe some of the risks that those that are enrolled in a trial should know about? And then after that, maybe what are some of those benefits? And I think you may have mentioned a few already. That
Sure. Thank you. So obviously any drug or procedure or device can have side effects. And unfortunately, some of those side effects can be unwanted, and that can definitely affect one's health. Sometimes you'll have medications at home that you have to manage, as opposed to receiving them in an infusion center or in a hospital setting. So sometimes kind of managing medication doses at home sometimes can be challenging for some patients. The treatment may not help you, or it may not help other participants. And that's a definite risk of the trial, that while the goal is to obviously see benefit and to see a decrease in the cancer, progression, that obviously can't be promised. And so that's a concern, that the treatment may not work or may not work for other participants. Sometimes obviously, because you can't definitely all get the new thing being studied, because you want to compare it to the standard of care, you could be randomly assigned to receive the standard of care, or sometimes a placebo, which isn't very common in cancer cases, but you may not necessarily get the new drug that's being studied on the trial. And obviously there is a time commitment, for trials that sometimes can be more significant than perhaps being on a standard of care off a trial. You have to visit the study site. You may need additional blood tests. There could be hospital stays involved. So those are all important to speak, to the principal investigator and the study research team to see what your time commitment could be, particularly if you're traveling, for some distance to participate in the clinical trial. But even though obviously these are definitely valid risks and definitely a concern, I think the benefits, of moving medicine forward are definitely something that's important to stress. So with regards to benefits, the treatment with the experimental or the study meds may not be available anywhere else. So this may be the only way that you could get the study drug. You get a care from the research team and other healthcare providers that are familiar with the most advanced treatment, available for your condition. You have the opportunity to learn more about your illness and how to manage it. And most importantly, the satisfaction, I think, of helping others by contributing to the medical literature and by helping identify potentially new treatments for your condition and for others.
Oh, that's a great list. Yeah, thank you for going over that. Yeah, I think the majority is that the main benefit to me is that you're just surrounded by a team of specialists.
Sure.
And that they are on top of everything, and that, like you just said, you get to learn more, they get to learn more, and that you're really well taken care of. So I think that's great. You mentioned a little bit earlier about some of the patient protections that are in place when you are in a clinical trial. What are some of those safeguards and patient protections that we might want to speak to?
So historically, that goes actually back to the 40s, the 1940s. What's called the Nuremberg Code was one of the first, looking at ways to keep patients more safe and have basic rights for a research subject. It may also be called the doctor's trial for our history buffs. But unfortunately, Nazi physicians did commit quite significant atrocities to subjects in concentration camps. And so that was a trial that said that obviously these patients or subjects can't be treated this way, and everyone has basic rights, basic human rights when it comes to research. And then when you look at the Declaration of Helsinki in '64, that really stressed the importance of a written consent. So informed consent for patient, not just something verbal, but actually written. And that also talked about the obligations of a physician and investigators to the subjects and studies. And then you had the Belmont Report in 1976, which is significant based on, it was created by the National Commission for Protection of Human Subjects and Biomedical Research. And that unfortunately was based on a 40-year study of the Tuskegee study that studied syphilis in African-American men who unfortunately were denied treatment for approximately 40 years. And as a result, many died of the condition, many contracted it and passed it on to their children, so they developed congenital syphilis, and many live with persistent disease. So based on that, this report came out that there are 3 basic values that are important to stress for all clinical research. So the first one is respect, that all people should be respected. The second one is beneficence, where you protect people from harm by giving them the most benefit with the limited risk. And the third is justice, that you try to make sure that all people share benefits and burdens equally. So that's important now and kind of the hallmark. And we take pretty much annual testing, as all investigators do, to ensure that we're familiar with all the basic, principles of research, and that we're ensuring that we see a trial that shows respect for the subjects, that is a beneficent trial, and does obviously stress the importance of justice. So there are a lot of safeguards now in effect for clinical research that unfortunately weren't there for many subjects in the past.
Wow, that is great to know. You had talked a little bit about institutional review boards, and we get some questions every once in a while about what exactly that is.
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So that's actually a staff, typically of different providers within the hospital system, not all necessarily not associated with the trial, that are looking to see how to protect patients in clinical trials, and that they're following the federal laws as part of participating in the trial in the hospital or the sponsor settings. And they're actually also regulated by the Federal Office of Human Research Protections to make sure that the IRB is following the laws that direct their process. So there's a clinical trial protocol, as I'd mentioned previously, that's reviewed by the IRB to ensure safety for patients. They definitely review the informed consent in its entirety to make sure that it's accurate, that it's complete, and that's easy to understand. It's important to try to have a consent in someone's native language, which isn't always, easy per se if there's different languages involved, but it definitely is important so that all patients have access to trials, and it's not restricted to those who only speak English or have the ability, financially to participate or travel for trials. In addition, when you're on a phase 3 trial, there's something called a data safety monitoring board, and that watches the progress and the results of the clinical trial. So they can also stop the study if they're seeing that there's a more effective, the treatment is very effective and therefore should be offered to all patients enrolled in the trial, or that's less effective and therefore should not be continued. And they also look at safety concerns. So if there's more risk than benefits of participating in the trial, then the trial would stop so that you're not exposing patients to harm.
Got it. Oh, thank you for explaining that. That's very helpful.
Sure.
What are some of the questions, maybe if someone is enrolled in a trial, hasn't quite started yet, is there a list of questions that maybe we should let patients know about that they may want to take and ask their physician? Do you want to go through maybe a few of those? I think I had a few ideas. Yeah, what are some questions that maybe they should ask?
Yeah, I think it's important for patients to really understand the purpose of the trial.
Yes.
And to understand from the investigators why they believe this treatment may be better than what's available now. And a lot of that will be a lot of science background, but if they can break it down in a way that you can understand, so that he or she knows what the potential, like science background is, that contributes to why this would be the next best thing for their condition. You can't always answer this because you can't obviously predict the future, but how long you'll be in the trial,
right?
So that you have kind of an idea for planning purposes. It's important to know what kind of tests and treatment are involved, particularly again if you're traveling for some distance, so what's feasible for you and your family. How if it's working. How often you're going to have surveillance scans or surveillance blood work. Many trials, it's on 8 to 12 week intervals, so you get a sense of what's going on, while you're on the drug. So if you're having particular significant side effects, that at least you know that the drug may be working, and perhaps you're willing to continue based on how you're feeling. How will you be told about the results is also important to know. Is that something that's communicated to you, by phone or by mail? And how long you can choose to decide if you want to be in the trial. There is like a screening period, that's involved. And so typically the trials have very fixed windows of like when they can enroll the patients and when the CAT scan has to be done in a certain period of time, or the eligible blood work has to be done in a certain period of time before you can enroll. So those are very strict windows. So it's important, if you're eligible, to try to keep to that window so there aren't any deviations from the trial, so that everything is really, you can compare, how patients are responding without having too many deviations from treatment. Who you can speak about or who you can speak to, during the trial. Are you able to contact the principal investigator? Do you have a research nurse assigned to you? Is there a patient advocate on the trial somewhere that where if you have additional questions, particularly if it's late at night or on the weekend, like who you can reach out to so you can get those questions answered, I think is key as well.
Yes, I do too. I do too. We did get a question from the audience, I guess you could say audience on a Facebook
yeah.
Regarding costs. So
sure.
I'm sure you get this a lot too. Does insurance cover the cost of a trial, or what should they be thinking or have expectations about when it comes to costs?
No, those are important to ask. So typically if it's by a sponsor or like a pharmaceutical company, sometimes a lot of things are covered by the trials. Or by the sponsor itself. But if it's like hospital based, usually what's called standard of care means like if your physician would normally order a CAT scan perhaps on 3-month intervals, that may be deferred to insurance. But if there's other things that are outside of the standard of care, sometimes those things would have to be deferred back to the study. So it's important to definitely ask what your potential out-of-pocket costs could be, which aren't always, unfortunately, able to be estimated. But obviously, you want to participate in the trial, but you also want to be realistic about what your financial situation is. And it's good to have a heads up that there's going to be a lot of unexpected costs before enrolling that you're held responsible for. So definitely, those are very common questions that the research staff that we get all the time. And so it's definitely key, to ask, what potentially is covered by my insurance company and what's potentially covered by this study.
Yeah, and then another thing I thought of as you were talking about that, because some of the costs also might be involved with patients who are having to maybe travel 3 or 4 hours to the facility. You got to think about those things. So transportation, gas, hotel, childcare, all of those. I just wanted to insert really quickly one of the newer resources that we have from the National Ovarian Cancer Coalition. We have a clinical trial fund that we just started last year. And for anyone that's enrolled in a clinical trial, you can definitely apply for the fund if you go to ovarian.org, and it will cover things like transportation, food, housing, childcare, up to $2,500. So that's something that you could look at and think about applying for, and that it might encourage you there a little bit. So, and then there are I know there's a lot of other resources, but I wanted to mention that. And then I think maybe, our time goes by fast, but I think maybe one of the final questions that I have too is, what maybe is one piece of advice that you might give to your patients who are participating or maybe even thinking about participating in a clinical trial?
Yeah, I would think just to really get to know the research staff involved and really know that they're committed to advancing, cures for ovarian cancer, and that no question is too small or too foolish, and that's why we're here, because we really want to make a difference.
Yes.
So I think it's important, and not that you don't get support on standard of care, by many means, but there's a whole, there's a whole team, of course, dedicated to the research patient. So I think you do get a lot more individualized attention, and that you definitely have the support of a whole staff and a whole system, looking to make advances in your condition.
Well, I think you've covered a lot of the basic points that we would want to communicate to someone who's in a trial, some of the things that they might want to think about and ask. And I think just setting expectations is so powerful too, so that they know what they're headed into.
Sure.
But we hope this is helpful to anyone that's enrolled into a trial and is getting ready to start. And we will, of course, be posting this wonderful video resource. Thank you, Dr. Tchabo.
Oh, my pleasure.
For joining us today. We will be posting this resource onto our YouTube channel. And if you have any other questions for us, please reach out, and ourselves and Dr. Tchabo will be glad to get back to you with any answers. So again, thank you so much. And
oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
To everyone next month. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you.